Hey, happy Tuesday. Happy book review day. Today's book is The Phantom Plague by Vidya Krishnan. And this is a book about tuberculosis. I'll just say it right up front. Nonfiction, book about tuberculosis, and it is super interesting. It was mentioned on one of the Vlog Brothers posts, John and Hank Green. Um, One of them was doing a deep dive on illness and tuberculosis and mentioned this book, and it sounded interesting to me, so I ended up listening to it. I listened to it via Libby, which is used to be called Overdrive. It's an app or service or whatever you want to call it through the public library. And you can get lots of audiobooks and ebooks that way. It's how I get a lot of my audiobooks. I don't like ebooks, weirdly. I like physical books and I like audiobooks, and those are my two jams, I guess. But anyhow, this book is about tuberculosis, and that's something that I hadn't thought about. When I think of tuberculosis, I think of something in the past. I think of movies set pre 1930. Somebody coughs into a handkerchief or a napkin, and there's blood on it, and you're like, oh, they're going to die. That's consumption, tuberculosis, TB, whatever you want to call it. Hadn't thought of it as a current thing, which apparently I'm just not paying attention, because what Krishnan does is talks about these growing treatment-resistant strains of tuberculosis. Primarily, her focus is in India initially, but obviously, it's a worldwide disease that spreads, just like we know other pandemics do as well. So, her book starts off looking at the kind of history of tuberculosis, and she does some investigation into early literature that deals with TB. Um, some of that is through Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I stumble with that name. And Bram Stoker, Dracula, kind of comes out of that tuberculosis and the fear of blood-borne diseases and not understanding how they work. Um, if you think of Dracula being pale and blood around the mouth, and then you kind of have a tuberculosis patient. And so that's super interesting, and then you get into more of kind of the progression of it and why it's still a concern. She talks a little bit about kind of the infrastructure in India where they tried to renovate the slums and they made really tall buildings, but unfortunately they're built so close together and the proximity just spreads disease. And so there's this moment where she describes being able to look down at this map and just see the epicenter of where these diseases are spreading. But super interesting to figure out like why some people are affected by it and some people aren't. And then she transitions into talking about podcasts, and you're like, why am I learning about podcasts now? But that is also super interesting, and she does that to talk about copyrights and patents, and ultimately how medications fall into that, and then how those things impact who gets the treatments they need, and when they can, or if they can, or how much they cost. And she really digs into a lot of history about that. And also, there's a part in there about like how during 9/11, there were all the anthrax scares, but one company kind of owned the copyright or patent to the treatment for anthrax. But the government, US government, was able to step in and say, like, this is an emergency, we need that, and kind of trump that patent. And so, maybe that's a possibility to get through for some of these medications that are much more urgent. But ultimately, the pressing issue that Krishnan is addressing is these drug resistant, treatment resistant strains or variants of tuberculosis. So, anyway, super interesting. A little scary, because it's real, and you never know what's coming. And having lived through a pandemic now, just not really wanting to do that again, and figuring out a good way to navigate that and kind of avoid the super bugs and find a path forward. But anyhow, I think you would enjoy it. Would definitely recommend um, The Phantom Plague by Vidya Krishnan. And let me know what you're reading too. I'm always interested in what books people are reading, what they have on their nightstand, what's in their stack. Um, and yeah, leave them in the comments or let me know. Thanks so much. Have a good one.